Hi, I'm John Knowles, software trainer for Adobe, and in this video, I'll be talking about adding effects and transitions in Premiere Pro. Now, if you're coming to Premiere from other editing software, this process may seem familiar or it may seem radically different. But don't worry, I'm going to show you how it all works. All right, I've got my project open here. This is an ad for Drip, everyone's favorite tasty beverage for finishing your workout. All right. And we've got a pretty nice edit going here, but we need to add some effects and transitions to some of these clips. Now, before I get started, I want to rearrange my workspace. This is my workspace I use when I'm editing, and I want to change that to a custom workspace that's been set up for effects. So if I click on the workspace button here in the upper right, I can choose effects right there. It's going to reorganize all of my panels and place the effects panel here in the upper right, ready to go with graphics, templates, and libraries if I should need those. And the properties panel is front and center below that. And it's pushed the project window down here to the lower left. And effects controls is also ready to go here in the upper left. Now, incidentally, you can also get to this workspace here from the window menu and go to workspaces. This menu, incidentally, is set up in alphabetical order. You see the first 9 entries get keyboard shortcuts. That's just based on where they fall in alphabetical order. If you want to float your custom workspaces to the top, I recommend putting a number in front of it, and that will place it right next to the corresponding keyboard shortcut number here. So you see effects is at 9. I could have used that keyboard shortcut to get there as well. The workspaces listed in this menu are in whatever order you would like them to be, and you can rearrange that order by going to the bottom and choosing Edit Workspaces. All right, I'm going to start by adding a transition between these two shots here. She's working out, and then she's in the gym. So we need a transition to bring us from this shot to this shot. Now, there's 2 different ways to add transitions in Premiere Pro. You can use the keyboard shortcut and add a default transition that you decide on between 2 clips. In this case, the default is a basic cross dissolve. And that's quite long, actually. That duration is also set as part of the default, and you can change all of that. If you want a different transition from what the default is set to, you can go up here to your effects panel. And I'm going to twirl down video transitions up here. And I'm going to pull that panel down, just grab between the 2 and pull it down. I don't need that much space for properties here. And you can see I have subfolders there for things like dissolve, immersive video, iris, and there's some custom ones that I have downloaded. I'm just going to go to the basic dissolves here. And let's say I wanted a film dissolve. I can grab that and just drag and drop, and that will replace the one that's on the timeline. And now I have a more subtle film dissolve between the 2 shots. You can see up here that cross dissolve, which is my default transition, has a blue square around it. That tells me that that is the default transition. So every time I hit the keyboard shortcut for transitions, it's going to add a cross dissolve. Let's say I wanted to make those always film dissolves. Let me delete that one real quick here. I can set that right now by clicking on Film Dissolve, right-click, and Set Selected as Default Transition. Now, obviously, you can only have one transition as the default at a time, but you can change it very quickly by just right-clicking on it and setting your desired transition to be the default. And the length is set in your settings or preferences. So you go up here and go to Settings and Timeline. And here you can set a custom duration for video transitions and audio transitions. They can be completely separate here. In this case, I think I am working in a 2997 timeline, so 30 frames or 1 second. That's pretty much interchangeable here. I can have a custom video default duration as 12, for example, and the audio can be shorter. I'm going to set that to frames as well. The audio can be 24 frames. I hit OK. And now if I use that keyboard shortcut, I will get that 12-frame dissolve between those 2 shots. Now, once you have a transition down here in the timeline between 2 clips, you can adjust it if you want to. You can click on it like so. It will open up here in Effects Controls, and you will see, in this case, the image of the clip outgoing and the incoming clip here. If you don't see those, check this box down here at the bottom to show actual sources. Typically, it looks like this, A and B. You can see the actual video clips there if you want. And you can adjust the amount of the effect you want it to start or end with, depending on how you would like that to display. Now up here at the top is a duration bar, and you can set that to whatever you want. In this case, it's 106. I can now set that down to 12 manually, like so, and hit return, and you can see that it changed the duration down here on the timeline. You can also double click on a transition in the timeline. I can set that back to 1 second. All right, so there's a little pop-up box you get if you double click. Now I'm going to zoom in on this transition, and when I click on it like this, I can also pull in the edges of it to make it shorter or to make it longer. You see the icon changes when I click on the transition, like so. And it remains centered over the cut point, and it will grow or shrink from both sides equally. And if I look here in effects controls, the alignment is indeed set to center at cut. Now up here in effects controls, you can actually tell that to start at the cut, and that will shift the start point of that film dissolve to the head of this clip, or I can change that to be at the end of the outgoing clip in front of it, which will basically fade it out, and then it will be a hard cut to the incoming shot. You can also change the alignment so it's not perfectly centered and shrink one side or the other. If you hold down the shift key when you pull on the sides, see, I can just pull the left side of this, so it's going to dissolve longer on the outgoing clip, for example, and not dissolve over too much of the incoming clip. So the alignment is off center at that point, and you can see the alignment is set to custom start now in effects controls. Now another way to modify your transition once it's on the timeline is up here in effects controls. You'll see an indication of both the incoming video and the outgoing video, and there is the transition between them. You can grab that white box here and pull the sides out, and you can see it's pulling out on the timeline as well. You can just grab this white box here and pull it left to right, and it will slide the transition and change the alignment. Or change the length again just by dragging in the sides like so. Now, if you have clips that have linked audio and video, like this interview footage here, if you select the transition point and add your default transitions note, it will add the default video transition on the video track, and then it will add the default audio transition on the audio tracks below. Now, we don't have time to show you every possible transition you can add here in Premiere Pro. That would make for a pretty long video, but let me show you a few of my favorites. Now, I have some interview clips here on the timeline, and there is a jump cut here. We made an edit in his sound bites here.
Mainstay.
And there's a jump cut there, which we could either cover with B-roll, cut away to something else, cut away to a different camera angle. If we don't have those things, we can try a morph cut. That is also in the dissolve folder here in the effects palette. So we're going to drag that between those two cut points there, and it has to analyze. But when it's done, it's going to try to smooth out that transition and actually morph one side of the shot into the other, and hopefully, if not eliminate, at least reduce the jumpiness of this cut.
Mainstay. 100 to 200 with my advance. 100.
So that's how the morph cut works. You can make it smaller. You doesn't have to be such a large transition between the two clips there. Again, I can shrink that down. It's going to reanalyze a little bit. All right, that finished. That's a little better. We also have dip to black or dip to white if you would like the transition to go completely black before coming back in, or going to white instead. And if you make that one really short, by the way, that one functions as sort of a flash frame. Down here, we also have options under iris. You can add that type of effect. So that's a circle. Let me make that one a little bit longer. So that's a circular wipe between the two shots there. Incidentally, on some of these, if you look at them in effects controls, you see they have the option there for a border. So you can do special effects like this. Let me just set the border width a little bit wider and set the color to white. There you go. You can see there's a border around that circle. So you get that type of effect there. Now, other types of transitions we have under the slide folder here. There's the option to push, for example. So I'm going to put that between these two clips. And that's a push from left to right. You can see it moving that way. If I click on it and look here in effects controls, I have those border options as well, but up here in the top left-hand corner, there's 4 arrows pointing at the screen. So right now it's pushing from left to right. I can reverse that by going right to left, or east to west, as it's called here, and it's going to go the other direction. Or I can set that to go north to south, and it's going to wipe from top to bottom or the other way. Just click on those little arrows up here, and it will change the direction for you. And the same thing with a slide. It's going to push the new shot over the outgoing shot. And it has the same functionality there. In this case, we also have corner slides we could do.
And I knew that.
The other option there is a whip, which gives you a little bit of motion blur. And you can't control the direction on this one, unfortunately, but it will go from left to right, and it will give you a nice kind of motion blur effect. I'm going to make that one really short. Now, I also want to point out up here under immersive video. Now, these effects are made for VR footage, but they actually work with regular non-VR footage as well. So, for example, if I use the VR chroma leaks option between these two shots, you see I've got some nice light leaks happening here on the spots of the image that have the most light, in this case coming through the windows. If I click on it, I can control some of those options there in terms of the strength of that light leak and the size of it vertically, for example, and the angle that it's at. If I don't want it to be straight up and down, I could do that at an angle. Let me pull that one a little bit wider. And there's some other fun ones to play with in here, like random blocks, for example. Get that type of checkerboard effect. Now, incidentally, you can add multiple transitions at the same time. If I select both of these clips and hit my keyboard shortcut, it's going to add my default transition. In this case, it's still set to film dissolve. It's going to add that default transition between those two clips at the length that I set in the preferences. But now if I select multiple clips on the timeline, like so, and hit the keyboard shortcut, I'm going to get transitions between each one of those. Now, with audio transitions, there aren't many options in Premiere Pro. If we look at that folder here in the effects panel, audio transitions, you see there's just 3 different crossfades you can do: a constant gain, a constant power, or an exponential fade. Now, you'll notice that that also has a default transition blue square here around constant power. So if I select that edit point and hit my keyboard shortcut, it's going to give me that default transition between those 2 clips. And I can drag a different one over that to replace it like I did before. But also notice here, we have this option on audio to actually pull these handles here. Let me delete this transition. When you hover over a clip, you'll see a little square here at the end of it. And this allows you to manually grab and dial in the fade you want. In this case, I'm going to have this clip fade out before it gets to the cut point. And then the next one starts. I'll click on it and hit delete to reset. You can also do the different types of crossfades by grabbing that square and pulling it across the cut point to create any of those 3 crossfades there, whether it's constant gain and power up in this end or pulling it down low to get the exponential fade. And you just drag up and down with your mouse while clicking on one of those squares. And if you pull left and right, you will change the duration, just like with the video transitions, or grab it and pull it left to right and change the alignment. Now you can add effects just like you add transitions. So if we open up the video or audio effects folders here in the effects panel, you can see all the different effects you can add. Again, we don't have time to go through all of these, but there's some really basic ones here I'd like to show you. So on this clip here, she's working out on this treadmill, and it's rather hard to make that out. And I want to brighten up this shot a little bit. Now I could throw that into Lumetri color and do a full color pass on that, but I think I'm just going to do a basic brightness and contrast adjustment. I could open up color correction here and find brightness and contrast right there, or with everything closed, I can just use the search panel at the top. If I know exactly what the effect is I'm looking for, I typed in brightness and there it is. And I just drag and drop that right onto the clip. Now you'll notice that brightness and contrast showed up here in effects controls. So that's where I would then adjust the options for that filter. So I'm going to increase the brightness and I'm going to play around with the contrast here a little bit. Like so, really try to bring out that shot without washing it out too much. All right, and I can quickly check my work here, A/B it, by turning off that little effects button right there and see how it looks. And I'm going to throw a little color tint on there as well. So I'll just type in the word tint until that option comes up. And I'm going to drag it either to the clip or to effects controls. You see that blue line there? It's just going to stack underneath. It doesn't replace the effect that was there previously. It's just going to keep stacking up below it there. So in this case, I'm going to map them to kind of a light blue color here. You see that's the effect there. And then amount to tint, and you can adjust there like so. So just a little bit of tint into that shot like so. And again, A/B my work. So let's say if I threw the exact same filters on this preceding clip here, and I'm going to quickly select both of those, hold down the Shift key and the Command key on the Mac here, and I'll do a basic copy and then go to this clip here on effects controls and hit paste, and they will be added to that clip. I can also do that across multiple clips if I wanted to. Let me hit undo real quick. I'll go back to this clip where I've added that tint and brightness and contrast. I'm going to right click and just copy it. And let me zoom back out here a little bit. And I'm going to find the other clips I want to add that to. I might just do this one and then that one here. So I'm going to hold down the Command key on here on the Mac and with Shift to just grab those out of sequence here. And I'm going to grab this one as well. And in this case, I'm going to right click and paste attributes. This can also be assigned to a hotkey. And what paste attributes allows to do is to take certain parameters from the clip you copied and add it to the clip that you're pasting it to. In this case, I don't want to add motion, opacity, or time remapping because maybe that's different between these clips and I've animated them all separately. But I do want to add these effects. So you see right there, there's the brightness and contrast and the tint. I could choose to only add one of those if I wanted to. And then I'm going to hit OK. And those effects have now been added to each one of these clips that I selected. And again, paste attributes. And there's an option there too. If I wanted to remove those attributes down the road, rather than going through here and selecting and hitting the delete key to remove the effects, I could click on that clip here in the timeline and go to remove attributes. And in this case, once again, I'm going to deselect what I don't want to remove. And I am going to select effects, which will strip those out. And that applies to multiples as well. You can remove attributes across multiple clips to instantly strip out several different effects. And there's also a way to globally mute certain effects here. You can actually add a button here to your program monitor bar. If you click the button window here, there's a little effects badge. That's for global effects mute. And once that button has been added, if you click it, any effects that have been applied to the clips will be turned off while this switch has been thrown. And you can see the clips in their original state. And then you would go back and turn this back on and restore your effects. Now, some effects have masks available. You'll see here under the normal opacity setting, you have the option to mask the opacity of any shot here. So I have this close-up of our runner's face, and I could use those mask tools to isolate a small portion of the shot here, just the eyes, for example. Using those tools there, and I get a mask. I'm going to delete that. Other tools have that mask option here. So I'm going to pull up a basic blur. And here is the Gaussian blur, one of my favorites. I'm going to drag that to the clip. And you see when it stacks up here in effects controls, it has the same masking properties here. If I just blur the whole shot, I'm just going to pull this slider here below. You see the whole shot gets blurry. Maybe I don't want that. I just want the eyes to stay crisp and everything else is going to get blurry there. And I can draw a custom mask here with this pen tool. Like so. I'm not worried about those hard edges. I just want to isolate the portion of her face that I want to mask off there. There we go. And I can feather that by a lot. And you'll see the feathering is represented on the screen by those dotted lines. Nice and soft. And I'm going to blur. Now in this case, it's blurring what is inside the mask, which is her eyes, which I don't want. So I'm going to throw this invert switch and it will blur everything outside the mask. And I'm going to dial that way down and make it more subtle something around 20, let's say. And I'll deselect the mask. And if I just A/B that again, you can see that's a very subtle effect, maybe too subtle. I'll crank that up a little bit more. There we go. Now, one of the things, by the way, you can do with masks on effects like this is track them. So right now, her face is going to move, and that mask is not going to move with it. So I'm going to go to the first frame of that clip. I just hit the up arrow key on my keyboard, and I'm going to grab this mask with the hand tool here and put it into its starting position. And then I have the option here under mask path to track forward, backward, or one frame at a time. I'm just going to track forward. This is one of the few things in Premiere Pro that you can track. We don't have regular motion tracking here, but you can track masks, and it's going to try to grab onto those pixels and hold on to them. And you see as I scrub through, it did indeed give us a nice track. So that mask is moving with the footage, and that keeps that kind of isolated blur here on her face and keeps the eyes nice and crisp. And anything else that has that tool, you can have those same masks applied to it here. So I could also do a specific type of color effect here. I'll go back to brightness and contrast, and I'll drag that back down. And again, I'll put my playhead on frame 1, and I can even copy that mask with the regular copy command and paste it to brightness and contrast. You see the keyframes came through and everything. And on that mask, I'm going to change the brightness like so. And again, that one I don't want inverted, so I'm going to do this. And obviously dial that way down. Just a little push to make her eyes a little bit brighter. Not too much where I see the edges, but just a little bit more in that portion of her face. And I could draw 2 masks just to do the eyes, but just to give you a quick example of the way you can stack up these effects and have them use the same mask. Once you've tracked it once, you just copy and paste it to another effect, and it will use it again. Now we add audio effects the same way we add video effects. If I go up here to the effects panel and twirl down audio effects, you see I have a lot of options in here. I'm going to isolate one sound effect here. This is the sound of the ice as she gets out of this ice bath here. Let's take a listen. That's fine and all, but I feel like it should have a little bit of reverb in this rather large space. She's in a locker room. That should be a very bright environment with lots of echo or reverb, as we would call it. So I'm going to grab the convolution reverb filter there in the effects panel, and I'm going to drag it to the clip or over here in effects controls. Either way works. A lot of times for these audio effects, you won't see the controls right here natively inside the effect. They may be available under this individual parameters, but most of the time you're going to want to hit the edit button. And then you get this dedicated panel for the audio filter itself, and there's a presets drop down. In this case, it can be go to Judge's Chamber, for example, and there's different options below that as well. So we're going to go with, Locker Room is available. Let's hear that. All right, so right away we're getting some better reverb in there. I'm going to leave that on default. Try that again. There we go. So we can play with those individual controls there to, let's see, the room size is already cranked to maximum. We can make the room size a little bit smaller, for example, change the pre-delay. And then once we're happy with it, we can close out this panel. You can also A/B it real quick. There's an on-off switch in there. It's before, this is after. There we go. Lovely. Incidentally, if you want to add any of these filters to an entire track, so not an individual clip, you want to bring up the track mixer window. So that's going to be here at the top, audio track mixer. And you want to twirl down the effects rack. It's actually hidden by default. It's this little right-facing arrow here at the top. So turn that down. And then each one of these is an effects rack for an entire track. So if you want to add something to the music, for example, just click on these drop downs and then pick the audio effects up here. And if you have custom plugins using any of these plugin formats, they'll appear here at the bottom of the panel. Now, one other thing I want to show you is how to use the properties panel to affect multiple clips at the same time. So here in my interview footage, I have 3 clips of the coach here, and you'll notice that there are black bars at the top and the bottom. It is letterboxed, and there is black there. That isn't just transparency and the shot is anamorphic. it was cropped in camera somehow or in the transcode, and so those black bars are considered part of the image. And if I were to choose to scale or set to frame size, it wouldn't change anything. So these have to be manually scaled up, which could get pretty tedious if you have to do an entire sequence of these. In this case, I happen to know that the proper scaling is 108%. Now, typically you would go into the effects controls and click on the scale up here under the motion tab, and you would do those one at a time. But with the properties panel now, we can do that with multiple clips at the same time. So I'm going to grab 3 different clips. There's one of the other interview subject here and these other 2 coach clips. I'm going to grab all 3 like so. And you'll notice that in the properties panel, it says multiple clips are selected and the scale is set to 100. I'm going to type in 108. And now each one of those clips has been scaled to 108. So you can select multiple clips in the properties panel and transform them all in one shot, which is really, really great. And they've added the crop controls down here as well. Those are automatically in the properties panel now. So if you needed to, say, crop a bunch of shots, so for example, if I grab all 3 of these clips and I give it a left crop of 50%, it's now cropped all 3 clips. I'll hit undo. So I'll select both these clips. I will scale them both to 120. And then I will reposition them so they're a little bit off center, like so. And again, both of them will match. And of course, you could animate any of these properties either using, again, the properties panel or the effects controls panel. In this case, I want to do a split screen going from this athlete to this coach so that they're both on screen at the same time. I'm going to quickly pop her video up to a higher track and pull it just over his footage a little bit, like so. I just hold down the Option or Alt key to overlap just the video. And you see, oh, I think there's some keyframes already there. I think I left them behind. So I'm going to redo those. Let me click the stopwatch to get rid of those earlier keyframes there, and I'll reset that back to center. So starting at this point here, I want to have her shot slide over. In other words, push over. I'm going to use position controls for this. I'm going to set my first keyframe over here in the properties panel by clicking on the diamond, and then move the playhead to the end of the transition. I don't need it to be as long as that, so about there. And I'm just going to drag the position over like so that she's here. And I also need to crop in on that side simultaneously. So I go back to that first keyframe here so that these align, and I will crop in from the right-hand side. So I'll set my keyframe there. Go ahead to the second position keyframe, and once this keyframe lands, it's also going to crop in from the right-hand side, and I'll just grab the coach real quick, and I will move him over so that he's not underneath that shot too much.
And I've ever met.
Yes, I did. I started out at University of Washington. I did high school.
All right, and maybe I'll just keep her in the shot like so.
Man I've ever met.
Yes, I did. I started out at University of Washington. I did high school, and collegiately I started at UW.
And there we go. Now, in some NLEs like Avid, for example, you can add one copy of an effect to multiple clips and then go back in and auto nest that so that you just have to change one parameter and you'll change every copy of that effect across multiple clips so that you don't have to update them all individually. We don't have that in Premiere Pro per se, but let me show you a great workaround to change something across multiple clips simultaneously. So I would like to make this entire sequence black and white. And I could add that effect to each clip individually, but if I decided to change the look of that filter, I'd have to go back and correct each individual clip and the instance of that effect on it. Instead of doing that, I can add an adjustment layer. So I'm going to go down here to the bottom of the project panel, and there's the new item icon. And I'm going to click that and go to adjustment layer. And by default, it's going to set up to match whatever current sequence you have open here. So there's my 1920 by 1080, 23976 square pixels. Looks great. Now, it won't apply it automatically. So you need to then drag it into the timeline, and it won't match the length. So we're going to pull that out very quickly to cover the entire length of the timeline. And the way this adjustment layer works is that anything I add to it is going to affect whatever is below it. If something is above it, it will not be affected by that adjustment layer. It's a similar setup to the way they work in both After Effects as well as Photoshop, for example. So rather than apply an effect to get this black and white look, I'm going to choose a preset. At the top of the effects panel here, there are 2 presets folders. This top one here has things in like picture-in-picture presets that are pre-made, for example, or these twirl in, twirl outs,
If you get a scholarship.
like so. Let me hit undo. And below that are the Lumetri presets. And these are pre-built looks that are using the Lumetri effect. And if I click on the folder here, you can see a quick visual representation that is based on the clip that you have the playhead parked over. That will update the preview window here. And we have one for monochrome, which is all different black and white looks. And wow, this punch one looks really, really powerful. So I'm going to try that. I'm just going to drag that preset right over the adjustment layer. And now there is just one thing controlling that black and white look that's on top of everything. And you'll see here, this is the adjustment layer. And for the effects controls of the adjustment layer, there is the Lumetri effect right there. It is set to monochrome punch. And I can modify that. I can reduce the saturation. And I can go in and just dive in without even opening up the Lumetri panel. I can adjust, say, the exposure, which is a little bit dark. There we go. It's a lot brighter on some of these. And play around with the contrast a little bit more. Bring in some of those midtones and shadows that were lost. And I'll even bump the shadows like so. There we go. It's a much more pleasing look there. A little too washed out in some of these shots, so I'll bring that back a little bit. There we go. So I'm just controlling one instance of this effect across the entire timeline up there in the adjustment layer. I can turn that off to go back or even hide that layer, and it will quickly take that effect off the entire timeline. You can stack multiple adjustment layers with different effects inside of them if you want. And again, it affects everything that is underneath. Let me go back in and turn that layer back on. And if I were to say move this clip above it, it would be in full color. And the rest would go back to black and white because they are below the adjustment layer. Now, one last thing I want to show you is a quick way to remove effects or transitions across an entire sequence, all in one shot. Right now, there isn't an easy way for me to grab multiple clips and say, remove transition. The option isn't there. But what we can do is simplify this sequence and tell it to strip out all of the transitions. And that's going to make a copy of this sequence, and it will have all the items we don't want removed from it. So I'm going to go up here to the sequence menu, and at the bottom you see simplify sequence, and it's going to add the word simplified to the end of the new sequence there. And we have options in there. We can close the vertical gaps, we can flatten multi-camera clips, and down here you can see I can remove graphics, I can remove transitions through edits, disable deleted tracks, disable clips, offline clips, or clips that are labeled with a certain color. I can also choose to strip out any and all sequence markers based on color below. In this case, I'm just going to remove transitions and go ahead and close any vertical gaps there. And I'll hit simplify. And there is the copy of the sequence. Let me go ahead and delete that adjustment layer. Although it did, just as a note, it did remove the empty track that was between the adjustment layer and the top of the sequence there. Go ahead and delete that out. And you see all the transitions are now removed. Now, the simplify sequence command is good for that, but it's also great for things like turnovers, where you may be turning this sequence over for color or for sound, and you don't want any of those transitions to be on the clips because those don't translate between NLEs, for example, going from Premiere Pro to something like DaVinci Resolve. You want to strip all those out before you then make an XML of your entire sequence. So that's it for setting up effects and transitions in Premiere Pro. Hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.